All right, thank you for staying. And if you're just joining, you're watching Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital in Abuja. Now, going into our next discussion on the program, according to experts, the rising cost of production and doing business in Nigeria can be attributed to the epileptic power supply in the country, which can be blamed on poor policies, corruption, dilapidated power infrastructure, among others. In the recent times ranking of the countries with the most stable power supply in Africa by WEF Electricity Access, Africa Facts, Nigeria failed to make the top 10 mark, with countries like Mauritius and Tunisia ranking first and second with 100% electricity supply. This has led to businesses in the country seeking alternative means of power generation and supply, which has also led to inflation. Small and medium enterprises in the country have also been looking towards the use of renewable energy, especially solar energy, as a means to address downtimes in their businesses caused by lack of frequent power supply. On the show this morning, we will be looking at renewable energy and how it could serve as an alternative to fixing Nigeria's electricity problem, which has been lingering for decades. Joining us this morning to talk about this is Dr. Toby Oluwatola, the Acting Executive Director of the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development, formerly known as the Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. Dr. Toby is also an energy and development expert. Thank you for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you very much, Ayuba.
You're welcome. All right, and let's begin with a look at Nigeria's power problem. In recent times, it seemed to have degenerated. I think it was last month we've seen that the national grid collapsed almost 3 times or so, and a lot of people are really concerned as to how this affects production and the economy generally. Let's have your own assessment.
Thank you very much, Ayuba, and thank you, Stella, for having me on the show. So, electricity in Nigeria has, at this point, become a perennial problem. And the thrust of the problem is that, at this point, for a growing population, first of all, we don't generate enough for our growing population, but we generate nearly enough. If you think about how much power is generated in captive sources in your home and my home, the truth is that we probably generate enough. On the grid alone, we've got anywhere around 15 gigawatts of electricity being generated. But the big challenge has always been, and currently is, wheeling that power from where it is generated to where it is most needed. And right now, the transmission company of Nigeria handles the transmission side of things, and the private distributors who got concessioned and bought 60% equity in the discos, 11 of them, then transmit to the final consumer. And the real bottleneck is that gap, because that space, because the transmission grid only has a capacity of about 5,000 megawatts thereabout, and then the distribution network somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts. So there's a bottleneck in that space.
So when you see that, don't you think that it's kind of too generous of you to say that we are actually generating, enough? In your own earlier
and what needs to happen is to figure out how we then take what we generate to where it is needed. The thing with power is that when you generate power, you have to use it in that instant that you generate it. Power can, except you are able to store it in batteries. Otherwise, power has to be used the instant it's generated.
And we have had instances where power is generated, but the companies do not take it to distribute. We have had that kind of instance. Why is that?
it's a good question. It's the same problem that we talked about. The fact that many times that infrastructure that is supposed to move the power from one point to another fails. So you have cases where, and what also tends to happen, and this is why the grid collapses from time to time, is that because power, when it's generated, has to be used instantaneously, when that power is generated and it flows in the direction of least resistance. Wherever there's no resistance, the power will flow there. But what then happens is that if you then have places that power is supposed to go to, and then for some reason the line that is supposed to take the power there is broken, then that power gets stuck and it burns things elsewhere. So the generator has to then turn off the generator. When it turns off the generator, it leads to frequency problems on the system, and that's usually what leads to those collapses. So what many companies, the discos do many times, is to then say, don't send me power, because right now I don't have the capacity to move everything to where it needs to go. Where renewables come in is, so first of all, we have to clean up the grid. We have to expand the grid. We have to fix the parts that are dilapidated and old on the grid. We have to get the grid to get to many places where it doesn't get to today.
I need to ask one question.
Okay.
We had an energy expert on this show not too long ago, and he said that the reason we're having all the power problems we're having is because when the dams were constructed in 1950 something, before before Nigeria even got its independence, that it didn't take into consideration the population that was going to come later, and that the capacity, or that the way it was built, that the construction at that time had a problem. And I'm asking, is that really why we're having power problem in Nigeria?
No, that's not true. That's not true. Dams generate electricity the same way they've generated electricity for the last 100 years.
But here's the thing, yeah, with respect to that, what she said, before you proceed, look at it in the context of the fact that we have a national grid as a country, right? And some of the experts, have kicked against the fact that why should Nigeria as a country, with the kind of landmass we have a national grid where everybody is now, connected to.
Yes.
They've talked about unbundling this and making it maybe more on a regional scale that will enable the distribution a lot more easier. Take it from that angle.
No, that's an excellent question, because if you think about places where the electricity grids work well, so I'll just use the US for example. The US has what they call regional transmission organizations and independent system operators. So California has its own ISO, California Independent System Operator. The Maryland, DC area has PJM. So everybody has theirs. The UK has what they call the national grid, but the national grid is divided into zones. And what tends to happen is that when there are transmission constraints, what tends to happen is that you then have prices go up in the places where the electricity that allows the electricity flow in the direction of where the prices have gone up, and generators who generate more electricity in the places where the prices have gone up make more money. So the summary is that we've said that I wanted to correct the notion that the hydro dams are faulty. Yes, from time to time they have broken turbines, but for the most part, they still generate electricity quite adequately. Nigeria today is even more of a gas generator than an hydro generator. EGMI generates the largest, and then coming from the Niger Delta, we have quite a few generators that generate. The problem is then moving the electricity up north and towards the southwest, where a lot of it is consumed. So it's really a transmission problem. And the way you could solve that problem is to really generate electricity. Rather than deal with the transmission constraint of moving electricity up the grid, you can generate electricity closer to where it is needed and will it much cheaper to the places where it needs to be utilized.
Okay, so how does renewable energy comes into the picture and to salvage the situation? How can we make the most of it? How can we take advantage of it? You said that we are more of a gas generating,
Yes.
country in terms of power. Now, we have, abundance in terms of certain things. Sunlight, for instance, in certain northern part of the country
Yes.
is there. You could feel, if you go to Borno now or you go to Adamawa now,
the sun
you
is
don't
hot.
need.
The sun is hot.
It's almost like you've moved out of the earth,
Yeah.
to closer to the sun and all. So, how best can we take advantage of some of this, to translate into power for
Yeah,
us?
northern Nigeria has some of the best direct irradiation in the world. So we do have a potential. And what's even more interesting, and I think a lot of people haven't realized this, is that the price of solar panels since I started working in the sector has dropped more than 80% in about 10 years.
Why
More
is
than
that?
80%. Because there is, it's...
Because I know a lot of people are now buying into that. So why is the price dropping?
The first answer is China. China put in with their SunTrust program, put in a lot of money into the solar value chain. And the truth is, the process for creating the silicon cells has improved a lot, and we've learned a lot of how to make it more efficiently, so the prices are coming down. So the prices will likely come down a little more. Because there's now technology around how you make thin film solar that allows you create more batches of panels with one rule than we currently have. So the prices will come down by another factor of about maybe another 60% or so in the near term. The batteries of panel, the prices of batteries are also coming down, particularly the lithium-ion batteries. And as you do that more at scale, as we have more batteries being produced, that will also come down. The way the solar renewable energy is really able to solve the problem is that because it's decentralized, you can have more easily create modular systems. So I could have, and one of the things...
Before you go for that, I just want to know, can renewable energy replace the power that we need as a country?
You just have to have enough panels. So
because I know that a lot
misconception.
of countries where this renewable energy is used, just about 5% of the population are using it because they still depend on this power. So is Nigeria's case going to be different?
So you do have to have base load because the truth is renewable energies are intermittent. So the sun doesn't shine at night.
Exactly.
So you have to have base load, which many countries generate with either gas or nuclear or what have you, that gives you that base power. But the benefit of renewable energies is the opportunity to have them be decentralized. And there's a misconception that you can't power heavy machinery with solar. That's a wrong conception. You can power anything with solar. You just have to have enough panels.
Oh.
But oftentimes people have rather small roofs. They don't want to spend so much, so they don't put enough
because
panels.
I've always heard, okay, with solar you can't connect this, you can't connect that.
You can. It's just a question of how large your system is. But to be cost efficient, so when we advise clients, because I also run a renewable energy company, when we advise clients, we tell them you don't necessarily have to run 5 ACs. You can put one AC on the system. If you have to put an AC on the system, when there's no grid power, you can just use your fan, so that you can bring your costs down. And what many people don't also think about is when you think about because the thing that really stresses people out when they think about the cost of renewable energy is that it's an upfront cost, unlike your diesel generator or your fuel generator that you go buy fuel every week. This you make an upfront cost, and it's a cost that lasts you for the panels last you for 25 years.
Yeah, but you have to also consider that there's a cost for maintenance, isn't it?
Not
from time to time, you may need to run some kind of maintenance on the batteries or what have you.
Or to even change the batteries. There are times you need to change the batteries.
If you're using lead acid batteries, you may need to change them between 2 and 5 years. If you're using lithium-ion batteries, you need to change them between 7 and 10 years. So even if you consider that amount of time that you have a system that just works for 7 years, the fuel you would have bought within that 7 years, you would have paid back that money in 2 years.
Again, another issue is whether or not we have enough skilled, manpower, like the technical know-how to actually manage some of these things. Because the experience of some people is that, you have people who come, take your money, say, okay, they are doing this fixing, and then at the end of the day, it doesn't work. So is there a gap there?
There is certainly a gap there. And that's the one gap that a lot of players in the sector are trying to fill right now. There's lots of solar academies across the country. Lagos has an energy academy. Here, REA has all sorts of programs that train young people, women, and co in solar technology, because there is a skill gap there and there is a knowledge gap there. And even after the system has been built, people who build system also need to educate the client on how to when there are basic, because many times what happens is a fuse just trips to protect your system, and people just get confused and what's going on. And all you have to do is very simple fixes that if there was an education gap closed, that problem would be solved.
Dr. Toby, one of the problems that we have in Nigeria is that affects small businesses is power. So if I were a small business owner,
yes,
how do I key into this? And would it be profitable to me?
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is yes. If you're a small business owner, you should key into this because it will save you money in the long run. That's the short answer.
How? Because you also mentioned that it's a lot of investment at the initial point. If I were a small business owner and I do not have that kind of money, what do I do?
A lot of the companies now, the good solar companies now, provide you with debt, with a lease to own system, where you pay a small upfront fee and they spread the rest of the fee for you over 2 years. So a lot of the companies now provide that. So you can look out for companies, and they're all over the internet. You can look out for companies that provide that.
Okay.
And I also have to add this, that there is a program that the REA has called the Nigeria Electrification Program, which is perhaps the only thing that, again, I don't want to be disparaging of government, but it's one thing that they're doing well. Where they give a grant to companies to go help build rural mini-grids using solar. And there are lots of companies who have been pre-qualified to do this, and part of the pre-qualification is an assessment that they can do it well.
Okay, now let's talk about having some of these installations on a large scale.
Yes.
We probably have talked more about having them
Yes.
in bits and pieces,
and
and here and there. How is it possible for us to have large corporations invest heavily in this regard, in the renewable energy, such that they can actually provide power to people, to communities and all of that?
Your question is, it hits me at a very special place, because I think that eventually, for the scale of the problem that we have, distributed systems are not going to be enough. We need to build larger solar farms. And right now, there are 14 projects that had signed PPAs with the government of Nigeria, but because they couldn't get the financing they needed, because for some reason they couldn't get the guarantees, the bank financiers couldn't get the guarantees they needed to guarantee that they will buy the power from them consistently, those projects are moribund. But what is beginning to happen is that private actors are now beginning to say, okay, I own a disco. Within my disco network, I can sign up 100 customers that will commit to buying power from this renewable energy company for the next 20 years. So banks will get a bank to give a guarantee so that you can build a 200 megawatt system that can serve, close to 1 million people consistently for 25 years. And those types of arrangements are starting to surface. The confidence is still not there, to be honest.
Now, can you guarantee that this can actually, because what we need in terms of solving our production problem is power for industrialization.
Absolutely.
Can you guarantee that when we have such, we can actually, take care of this?
First of all, nobody can guarantee anything in the world, but there's a high level of confidence that it will significantly ameliorate the problem. And but what you also need, I also have to add this just for completeness, is as you're adding that level of intermittent power to the grid, you've also got to add some storage so that you can create what they call resilience. There are times when you're generating excess power, the excess power goes into the storage. And when you're not generating enough, the storage releases it. So you've got to also add resilience to make sure that it can guarantee to a very high level of confidence that we
Okay, do you think that there's a problem with maybe the legal framework in terms of alternative source of power generation in Nigeria? Do you believe, or because I've heard, certain people say that, look, that we have a problem with, certain legal frameworks as to power generation in the various regions and all of that. So do you consider that as a problem?
Certainly. That has been a problem historically. And the rule is that if you're generating more than 1 megawatt, you have to get a generation license, and if you're generating, close to 20 megawatts, you've got to put it on the grid and whatnot. So there is a limitation in that space, but I see a lot of legislative advocacy to sort of soften that, but that then needs to translate to NLC regulation.
Is there any bill or anything before the legislators at the moment to that effect? I will be
very honest. I'm not up to date on that. I heard rumors that there was one, but I'm not up to date on it. But even if there was and it was passed, it hasn't trickled down to the regulator, which is where it really matters.
All right. Now, there's also the politics of power. We cannot overrule that. Right now, as it stands, it appears that there's some kind of monopoly, in Nigeria's power generation and distribution for whatever reason. Of course, for interest, for personal interest. So, in that regard, do you think that we can actually break away from this to be able to actually provide power for Nigerians as they should have it?
I think that where the monopoly is at this. So first of all, you cannot run away from monopoly where power is concerned. That's the first thing to be clear about, because it's what they call power, just like water, just like telecommunications, is what you call in economics a natural monopoly. Because the reason why it's a natural monopoly is because you can't have 10 different people building power lines that come to your house and come to my house. It will create chaos. So you can only have one company build power lines that go to everybody's houses, and then everybody pays something to use those lines.
But isn't that monopoly dangerous for the populace?
And that's the role of regulators. That's the role of regulators. So regulators then come in and say, okay, so we've built these lines. These are the rules that will guide competition in the utilization of the lines. You, the DISCO, we've sold this mini grid, this region to you, but you cannot if you will not serve the people, if there are still underserved people within your jurisdiction, you have to create space for other people to come and serve those people. And what we found in Nigeria is that many times the DISCOs have used, very aggressive competition tactics to really stifle competition within the monopolies that they control. And this is where the regulator has to play a firmer role in ensuring that even though there are these natural monopolies that have been generated, you've got to still create competition to make sure that people get served properly. For example, there was the issue in Ikoyi where I think the residents of, I think, Banana Island wanted to go sign a PPA with a private generator to help them make sure they have reliable power, But then after the investor had spent some money, Ecodisco then comes and says, we'll offer a much better rate and give you reliable power. And that gentleman who had spent money is then stranded because he also hadn't had very firm contracts at the time. So that's one area where the regulator definitely needs to play a firmer role. And we have what they call interconnected mini-grids now that is a regulation that allows for these things to happen. But to build an interconnected mini-grid today, you have to work hand in hand with the DISCO, who sometimes are not cooperative.
Okay, when the whole concept of privatization in the power sector came, a lot of Nigerians were optimistic that, this is the game changer. We are now going to have power supply stable and all that. But to the disappointment of many till date, we're here. This is where we are till now. So when that idea came, people were expecting, we are going to see the kind of privatization that happened in the telecommunication sector. Like we have, the networks, all the networks that we have today. Is there a chance at any point that we are likely going to see that happen in the power sector?
I think that there is a chance, and I think that it will happen. So also we have what we call the willing buyer, willing seller regulation, enable and eligible customer regulation that allows people who, individual companies and individual estates to say, okay, we want to go sign a contract with another private entity to give us power. So that has worked in many estates, as you would see, residential estates. If you live in an estate, you see many estates have reliable power because they're able to use that regulation to their advantage. And it's going to be so first of all, two things need to happen. Number one, we've got to really invest in fixing the transmission infrastructure. When Abba Kyari was alive, there was a negotiation with Siemens that was
when he traveled to Germany.
Yeah, when he traveled to Germany, that was going to see that happen in some way. So that still needs to happen, fixing the transmission grid. But also, there's got to be more room for competition within the DISCO networks.
Are you saying we need more DISCOs?
No.
Okay.
What we need is more. So we need more responsible DISCOs in some cases, but in other cases where we don't have, and that's also the role of regulator to some degree to be a little firmer with the DISCOs. There are DISCOs who use all sorts of underhanded techniques. They won't give you a meter and they charge you estimated bills that bear no correlation with reality. With reality. So we've got to have more responsible DISCOs.
Okay, now aside the, we've talked about solar power, of course, solar energy. What other options, of sources of energy do we have in Nigeria that we can actually take advantage of, to provide access to power? We talk about hydroelectric, of course. That too, we've seen that there have been projects. Some of them have been merely on the front pages of newspapers, and that's all. So, what other sources of energy can we actually harness here in Nigeria?
So, good question. So definitely Nigeria is a very viable wind destination as well. At this point, it's not as cheap as solar, but it's equally viable. So wind is a good alternative. In many cases, we could, even though biomass and ability to convert waste to energy is still expensive, it is definitely something that on smaller scales could work. Another technology that could work, and again still in the area of biomass, is biogas, where you have a farm that generates a lot of agricultural waste. You can convert some of that agricultural waste, so say like rice husk, or the corn hubs and
Okay, how
whatnot,
about the
convert that
acceptability?
to power.
Do you think that Nigerians have come to that awareness
Exactly.
of, accepting these other means of energy?
It's all about, I think
like
Nigerians are
really
reasonable
patronizing
people.
them?
It's about
Especially in the
cost.
rural areas. Are they aware of this, and do they know how they can key into this?
So Nigerians are practical people. If there is a solution that is practical and there's a service, a company that is able to serve them, Nigerians will buy into it.
Affordable.
And there are many, and it's affordable. Exactly. So, and there are many mini grid companies today that are serving the rural areas because ultimately, when you think about it, even if they're charging you 120 naira or 150 naira per kilowatt hour, it's still cheaper than you having to go take a bike to wherever you can buy fuel for your gen, or use candle, or use wood. It's still cheaper for those people, and they pay, even in the rural areas. So ultimately, it comes down to, do we have, are we creating environments where companies who want to invest can invest in a way that is safe, and they can make their returns.
So in your view, how long is it going to take before renewable energy will be able to bridge the gap, the energy gap?
In my view, I would want it to happen this year, but I'm also being realistic.
Realistically,
I know that it won't happen this year. I think that inevitably, within the next, so I think one thing that will have to change, another thing that needs to happen is that the grid needs to be smarter, and we need regulation around what they call net metering. What is net metering? Net metering is when I'm generating power in my house, say with my solar energy, and I can sell that power back to the grid when I'm not using it. So we're both here now, there's solar in my roof that is generating electricity. If it can be selling power to the grid so that the grid can sell to someone else while I'm not using it, that's a regulation that we need to pass immediately, and we need a grid that is smart enough to do it. Because what will also happen is that when electric cars now come, these cars come with 100 kilowatt hour batteries under them. These cars can power your house for 4 days, 5 days. So when those cars come, which is inevitable, those
while
cars
you're
are
still
coming,
using the cars, they'll be powering your house.
While you're not using the cars, they can be powering your house or someone else's house.
Okay, that's interesting.
So these things will be solved, but there needs to be regulation, which is net metering type regulation, but also there needs to be smart metering, smart systems on the grid, which many people,
Are stakeholders working towards getting that regulation?
There is some effort towards it, but I would say many of the efforts tend to be tepid, and it's not as aggressive or going as quickly as it should.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on Daybreak this morning and sharing with us
Thank you for having me.
This information. Yeah, we appreciate you. We've been speaking with Dr. Toby Oluwatola, and he's the Acting Executive Director of the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development, formerly known as the Premium Times Center for Investigative Journalism. He's also an energy and development expert, joining us this morning.